All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is our last new information for the circulatory system. So once again, please split screen and Notability with your circulatory system notes, part 2, and you can take notes along with me. All right, since this is our last new topic for the circulatory system, I just wanted to look at all the learning targets one last time. We talked about the anatomy of the heart, the blood vessels entering and exiting the heart. You followed the pathway of blood through the heart, all the different chambers, vessels, and valves. And then we talked about the difference between the right and the left side of the heart. We talked about the cardiac rhythm. We looked at the electrical circuitry of the heart and how an electrocardiogram works. We talked about the difference between tachycardia, bradycardia, and fibrillation. We are currently on learning target number 3. Last week we focused on the all the major blood veins of the human, and then this week we're going to finish up with the arteries. Another thing we're going to do in this podcast is we're going to talk about some alternate circulation, the circle of Willis, the hepatic portal system, and fetal circulation. So we're going to learn that today too. Remember, we did cross off this one bullet point. I can identify the major blood vessels of the cat. I actually went into school last week and I cleaned out the fridges. It was definitely kind of a weirdly emotional moment. I took a couple of pictures and I thought I'd maybe make a short video in case you needed some cat closure. Next, we talked about blood pressure and pulse. You guys did a virtual blood pressure and pulse lab number 11. And then throughout all of the podcasts, we've talked about all these different surgical procedures to repair the heart. I do have a sacrative quiz specifically for Learning Target 5 that I'll open up in the near future for you guys to take just to review all that information. If you downloaded the actual Learning Target file, you'll know that there actually is a Learning Target number 6. But we will not be covering learning target number 6. It's CPR and AED, which is something that the health teacher, Miss Melzer, does. So I'm not qualified to teach you guys about that. So you can cross off learning target number 6 if you have downloaded the file. Also, while we're on that file, if you could just make a note that the number of multiple choice, number of practical test questions is not going to apply for this unit. When we do decide if we're going to have a test for this unit or not, I will try to update these numbers. All right, we're going to talk about the superficial arteries today, so make sure you are split screened and Notability with your circulatory system notes part 2 at this time. All right, for this podcast, we're going to start off talking about arteries. Just to recap, remember, arteries take blood away from the heart and they circulate the blood all around the body. It gets to smaller arteries known as arterioles, and then the transfer of nutrients and materials happens at the capillary beds, and then it makes its way back to the heart through the vein. So just remember, all the arteries we're talking about today are moving away from the heart. Okay, you've already seen this slide as well, but let's refresh our memory about the difference between arteries and veins. So we're focusing on arteries today. So remember, arteries on average have just a higher blood pressure than veins do. They have thicker walls because of this to help withstand that blood pressure, but also be able to use the smooth muscle inside of them to help push that blood around the body. They have a shorter lumen, which means they don't have as wide of an opening inside. They go away from the heart. Almost all of them carry blood that's high in oxygen, except for the pulmonary arteries, which take the blood to the lungs. And there are no valves in arteries. Instead, there is that internal smooth muscle in the middle layer and that tunica media that helps to assist the direction of blood flow. All right, next in your notes is a diagram of all the superficial arteries of the body, and I took a minute to highlight the ones that we're going to be responsible for. And something you might notice is that several of the arteries are named after, again, the anatomy locations, which are the same as the veins. So you're going to see a lot of similarities in the naming of the arteries compared to the naming of the veins. All right, we're going to start our superficial artery conversation by discussing the aorta. So as you know, the aorta is the largest artery in the body. It leaves from the left ventricle of that heart, and it has several different regions to it. So I'm going to try to color code those regions for you so you can follow along with me if you want to color code them as well. So the first is called the ascending aorta. That is the portion that is leaving the top of that, the heart right there. So it's a part of the aorta that kind of shoots up out of the heart. So that's known as the ascending aorta. Next, you have your your aortic arch. Your aortic arch is the part where the aorta arches, and you can see it right there. And it kind of arches up and then comes down, and it starts traveling downward through the inferior side of the body. Next, you have your thoracic aorta. So the thoracic aorta is called the thoracic aorta because it's traveling downward through the thorax of the body. So a good designation would be the thoracic aorta is above the diaphragm. So it is the aorta above the diaphragm. So if you kind of want to draw in a invisible little diaphragm there, the aorta is known as the thoracic aorta above the diaphragm, and then below the diaphragm, it is known as the abdominal aorta. So as it passes through the diaphragm and below the diaphragm, that aorta is known as the abdominal aorta. So anything below that diaphragm is the abdominal aorta. All right, so now we're going to talk about the arteries superior to the heart. Now, the trickier thing about arteries compared to veins is it's not necessarily identical on the left and the right side. So there's a little bit of differences. So right now we're kind of focusing on the right side of the body. So here's that aortic, the ascending aorta we talked about. Here's the aortic arch we talked about. And I just drew in a heart to kind of give you a reference point so you can tell where the heart is. And then we're going to talk first about that brachiocephalic trunk. So different from the veins, we had two brachiocephalic veins that branched off. Here, we just have one large branch called the brachiocephalic artery. Remember, brachio refers to arm, and then cephalic refers to head, and that's where this branch off of the aorta is going. It's traveling up to the head through the common carotid artery, the right common carotid artery. And then it's also traveling to the arm through the subclavian artery. So subclavian, remember, think of your clavicle, okay, because that's where that is traveling. And we'll talk about this on the left side of the body, but after the subclavian artery, it's all the same as the veins were. So then you'll reach your axillary traveling through your armpit area. So your axillary artery, as you can see on the other side, and your brachial artery, and then it'll split into the radial and ulnar arteries as well. Okay, now we're moving on to the left side of the body. So we're still talking about branches that are coming off of that aortic arch. So I forgot to draw my heart in. Here's your heart. So you're superior to the heart right now. We talked about that ascending aorta that's coming off of that left ventricle, and then the aortic arch here. And then we talked about what's happening on the right side already. And then you can see on the left side, it's a little bit different. So the first branch we're going to come to is the carotid artery on the left side. So that's traveling up through your neck. So your carotid arteries are the ones you can feel your pulse there. So if you push up against your neck, where you would typically find a pulse in your neck, that is your common carotid artery. After that, the next branch is going to be this subclavian. Okay, so think it's traveling through your clavicle area. After that, it reaches your armpit area, which is known as your axillary artery now, and then it travels down your arm. So your upper arm, it's known as your brachial artery. And then if you could please add to your diagram here, it doesn't go far enough. Right, when it reaches your lower arm, it splits into a couple smaller veins. So you can label those. You have your I'm sorry, I said veins, but I meant arteries. You have your radial artery and then your ulnar artery. I labeled those backwards. Let's fix that so we don't get confused. Sorry. I'm trying to picture anatomical position. So this would be your ulnar artery, and this would be your radial artery. Okay, and again, the same thing's happening on the right side. At this point, it all branches and it follows the exact same structure down, only everything would be called right. Right subclavian, right brachial, or right axillary, right brachial, ulnar, and radial. Okay, we're moving on to inferior to the heart now. So the artery, the aorta, sorry, branches many times, as you can see in this diagram. We are not going to learn all the different branches. And if you're kind of wondering, like, well, Miss Brennan, how did you choose what branches to teach us and which ones not? To be honest, it all had to do with the cat. So the ones we're covering are all the ones that were the most visible in the cat and the easiest for you to find. So that's kind of why I'm picking and choosing. So as we travel inferior to the heart and we follow the aorta down, the celiac trunk is the first major branch of the abdominal aorta that we get to. And you do not need to know the names of the separate branches that you see here. What I might ask you, though, I might ask you is where does the celiac trunk take the blood? So the celiac trunk, which you see here, branches 3 times. So the gastric artery takes blood to the stomach. The splenic artery takes blood to the spleen, and then the hepatic artery takes blood to the liver. So that celiac trunk is this first big branch that pops off of that abdominal aorta, and it goes to the stomach, the spleen, and the liver. Okay, traveling even further inferior down from the heart, we pass the celiac trunk, and now another big branch that's coming off both the right and the left side of that abdominal aorta are the renal arteries. Renal refers to the kidneys, so you know where it's coming from. It is coming from that abdominal aorta and going into the kidneys, just as the renal veins came from the kidneys back to the heart. So, renal arteries is branching off on both the left and the right side of that abdominal aorta and taking it to the kidneys. All right, and now we've reached the final branches of that abdominal aorta. Now the blood is going to be traveling to each leg. So we've reached the common iliac arteries. So the common iliac arteries will branch and travel down the right and the left leg. There are internal and external iliac arteries, but for the sake of this class, since we're not going to be looking at the cat, we can just know the common iliac arteries. And the common iliac arteries are this big branch that happens right here. One goes down the left leg, one goes down the right leg. The same thing with the iliac veins. Okay, and once it travels down into each leg, it does the exact same branches basically as the veins did. So you reach your femoral artery at the top of the thigh. I'll do it on this side. Okay, once it hits your knee area, it is known as your popliteal artery. And then it turns into your anterior and posterior tibial arteries in your lower leg. All right, once again, we're going to do one of those simplified drawings. So we're going to do our simplified artery drawing. I find this the most helpful in understanding the pathway that the arteries are taking because it kind of gets rid of all the other superficial arteries that we're not going to talk about. It just leaves the most major superficial arteries that we're covering in one spot. So let's start. I'm going to make my pen a little bit thicker for this, for the blood vessels, and then when we label them, I'll make it kind of thinner. So I recommend you do the same thing in Notability. So let's start with the aorta. So we know the aorta is leaving the top. Well, it's actually leaving the left ventricle, comes out the top, and it forms that arch. And then it comes down and it goes inferior to the heart. We're going to start at the top though, so draw that arch in there. And then once you have that arch in there, we'll start with the right side. So the right side, you're going to draw a branch that comes up, and then it goes once up to your neck, and then through your clavicle area, down your arm, and then once it hits your lower arm, it splits into 2 different branches. So I'm going to make my pen a little bit thinner now, and I'm going to try to label all those as neatly as I can. So remember leaving, and I'm going to abbreviate in some cases. So leaving the heart, we have our ascending aorta. Okay, when it forms that arch, that is known as the aortic arch. Okay, then that first branch going to the right side of the body, we call that the brachiocephalic artery. Remember, brachio means arm, cephalic means head, and that's exactly where this branch is taking the blood. Okay, next we're going to move to the one that's going up to our head. This is known as the common, so we'll call it right common carotid artery. I'm just going to abbreviate artery every time. And then the branch right under our clavicle, we have our right subclavian artery. And then as it goes into our upper arm, we have our right brachial. And then as it travels down to our lower arm, it branches. Ooh, everyone go back. Sorry. I forgot where it hits the armpit. Oh no. I'm just going to try to fit it in there. So as it travels through the clavicle area, it's known as the subclavian, but then I forgot the auxiliary. As it travels through the armpit area, it's known as the right auxiliary. And then as it travels through your upper arm, it's the right brachial artery. And then as it travels through your lower arm, it branches into two, and it follows your radius and your ulna, and it is known as your right radial artery and your right ulnar artery. Okay, so now let's move on to the left side. So I made my pen a little bit thicker now to show my blood vessels. So the first thing coming right off that aortic arch, we have a blood vessel going up into our head, and then from that we have another branch that travels through your clavicle area, your armpit area, your upper arm, and then it branches into two. So I'm going to make my pen a little bit thinner now, and we're going to label those. So coming right off of that aortic arch, traveling up into your head, through your neck, this is your left carotid artery. And then traveling through your clavicle area, this is your left subclavian. Okay, as it travels through your armpit area, the left auxiliary artery. And then as it travels through your upper arm, we have the left brachial artery. And then once again, I'm sure you're getting the pattern. We have your left radial artery and your left ulnar artery. Okay, so now let's draw the blood vessels inferior to the heart. So we have our aorta coming down, descending aorta, traveling through the thoracic cavity, through the abdominal cavity. We have our first branch coming off here, and it branches and goes to three places. And then we have, after that, we have it branching and going to the kidneys. So if you want to draw some kidneys in there. And then it travels down further, and then it branches twice, and it travels down. I have a feeling this guy's going to be really badly proportioned. Travels into each leg. It travels down your leg, hits that knee area, and then it travels to your lower leg. So if you want to do that on both sides, and then we will work on labeling this guy. Okay, so let's start off right inferior to the heart. Right here, it's known as the thoracic aorta. Okay, so that's what the aorta is called above the diaphragm. So if you want to draw in like a diaphragm line, so you kind of have a reference point, and then below the diaphragm, it is called the abdominal aorta. So again, it's the same blood vessel, it's just called different things at different areas of the body. And then that first branch we drew, it goes to three major organs. It goes to the stomach, it goes to the liver, and it goes to the spleen. That is known as the celiac trunk. So this is the celiac trunk. Okay, I just spelled trunk wrong. Let's not tell anybody about that, but okay, so that's a celiac trunk. It's a little messy. All right, as we keep traveling down inferior to the heart, we're going to hit these two big branches that go to our kidneys. These are known as the renal arteries. So you got your right and your left renal arteries. Okay, we're following that abdominal aorta down even further into the legs, and then it branches and it goes down each leg. These are known as the common iliac arteries. And you got your right and your left side. And I'm just going to label, because this is the same pathway on both, I'm just going to pick a leg and label that one leg. So as it travels down your upper thigh, this is known as your femoral artery. And then we have, as you travel through your knee area, this is known as your popliteal. And then we keep traveling down, and as it reaches your lower leg, they are known as your tibial artery. Okay, so just let's look at an overview. So these are wow, this guy is really badly proportioned. Super long torso, very short legs, looking at the whole diagram. So hopefully this simplified artery diagram helps you. A really great idea is to erase it and practice it a couple more times just to get that pathway down. On a tour of the superficial arteries of the body using that anatomy app. Please remember, there are so many arteries of the body. I tried to, I can isolate some of the ones that we aren't learning about, and I got rid of them, but there are some like kind of floating arteries that don't look like they're connected to anything. So that's why that is happening. So let's start off superior to the heart. So we have our ascending aorta, and then our aortic arch. And then let's start with the right side. So on the right side, remember, it starts with that brachiocephalic artery, that kind of first large branch on the right side, and then it branches up to the neck. Here's the common carotid artery, and then through the clavicle, right under the clavicle bone, you have your subclavian artery on the right side. And then as it travels through the armpit area, you have your axillary artery. And then as it travels down your arm, you have your brachial artery. And then as we go to our lower arm, we have our ulnar artery and our radial artery. Now, as we go to the left side, okay, you can see the branches are just a little different. So right away from the aortic arch on the left side, we have our left common carotid artery, and then it branches off the aortic arch again into that left subclavian artery, into the armpit area, the axillary artery, and then down the arm, the brachial artery, and it's the same as the right side there. Now let's travel inferior to the heart. So I wanted to show you this view. So here is a posterior view of the heart. So you can see how that aorta travels down. So right here, it's known as the thoracic aorta because it's in that thoracic cavity. But as it passes that, imaginary diaphragm right here, it now changes to that abdominal aorta. So there's the abdominal aorta. And that first branch we talked about is that celiac trunk, where it goes to your stomach, your spleen, and your liver. If we keep following that abdominal aorta down, we reach our renal arteries on both sides, and you can see it branches smaller into the kidneys. And then we follow that abdominal aorta down, and it branches into each leg. So here's your common iliac arteries. And then we're just going to pick a leg and follow that down. It branches once it reaches your thigh to your femoral artery. And then I'm going to kind of rotate him around. And then once it reaches your knee, it's your popliteal. And then your tibial, which is always hard. I'm going to click on the bone every time. Your tibial. There we go, your tibial artery in your lower leg. Okay, so hopefully that helps you visualize all the different superficial arteries that we talked about. All right, now that we're done talking about the arteries, just a couple of special circulations of the body that I haven't mentioned yet. We're going to talk about those now. So the first one is the circle of Willis. So the circle of Willis, which you can see in the picture right here, is the special kind of circle of arteries that form at the very base of the brain. So it's known as the circle of Willis. So you can see it right there. So that is supplying, it's an arterial blood supply to the brain. Here is an MRI image just showing that circle of Willis from another point of view. And then the next one is called the hepatic portal circulation. So it's kind of something we mentioned a little bit when we talked about the digestive organs when we got there, but the hepatic portal circulation is formed by the veins that are draining all the different digestive organs. So it's known as the hepatic portal circulation because all of those digestive organs are all meeting at this hepatic portal vein and all draining into that one big hepatic portal vein that you see there in that diagram. So the digestive organs are draining into here, the spleen, the pancreas, and then the hepatic portal vein carries that blood to the liver. And that's where it's processed and toxins are removed before returning back to circulation. So this is how all the blood from our digestive organs, our spleen or pancreas, are getting to that liver where the blood can be processed and toxins removed. Okay, and this is just showing you how that hepatic portal system kind of works. So it shows the arterial blood coming in, the hepatic portal vein taking it to that liver where it's filtered, and then back into the regular blood supply. And then the last special circulation is the fetal circulation. As you know, the fetus, it does not receive blood supply as we do. They receive it from their umbilical arteries. So it's just a temporary circulation only seen in the fetus. It receives gases, nutrients, and exchange of waste through that placenta, through that umbilical cord and umbilical vein and arteries. All right, guys. Well, that is it. All the new information for the circulatory system. So don't forget to finish up your Ed puzzle now, and then we will focus on a review activity for arteries next, and then we'll move on next week to some other topics, maybe some information from our guest speakers, and possible optional circulatory system test. Thank you.